Delighted to be here. I'm going to just set the context. I have just two slides I want to show. And you're all familiar with, there's been a lot of discussion which has ramped up on green hydrogen. Hydrogen itself, of course, is very well established, and especially in your industry. But I think since the Prime Minister on last August spoke about green hydrogen and the National Green Hydrogen Mission, there's been a lot of excitement about green hydrogen and where this will go, and cemented with COP26, the net zero target for 2070. Where does hydrogen and green hydrogen fit into the mix? So hydrogen in India, about 7 million metric tons. Now contrast this with green is zero right now. There is a target, and we've been discussing this with the government and the industry and so on. So there is a sort of a rough target of 5 million metric tons by 2030. So it's fairly modest as far as the target goes, because we're already at nearly 7 million metric tons, but all of it is gray. And maybe some of it is, blue or moving to blue, etc. Now, the green hydrogen mission is, of course, very tightly focused on green hydrogen. But just taking a look at where this 6.7 million metric tons is going, and that's important because when you look at green hydrogen, you've got to figure out where it's going to be consumed, especially if there's a delta in price. Okay, so most of it is, in petroleum refining, or 54%, and the rest in fertilizer production. So that's pretty much where it is. And if you actually look at some of the other, so the green hydrogen mission I mentioned, that's been, really, it was startling, and it was great that it was part of the Independence Day speech and all of that. Unfortunately, the union budget, we didn't really see a specific, figure in terms of a budget for the mission. But presumably the green hydrogen mission, as it comes out, will kind of take care of that. Power, from the Ministry of Power, we saw some sort of a policy which spoke about renewable energy banking, defined green hydrogen also as hydrogen which is produced with banked renewable energy and not just, straight renewable energy from solar power, etc. So that was interesting, and this has been actually pretty good. And finally, last slide here, steel. We believe that apart from, of course, refineries and fertilizers, which is anyway consuming hydrogen, there's huge potential as far as steel goes, and steel is looking at DRI. DRI itself is not predominant as the technique now for production. But when it goes in, and whether it uses gray hydrogen or blue hydrogen or whatever, the point is that once it starts using hydrogen, and hydrogen doesn't care what color it is, the potential for green hydrogen use and green and renewable energy use and green steel is very high, and especially post-COP26, when there's been a commitment by Europe and the US and so on to import green steel. So there's very high interest in that. That's all I will do in terms of context setting. So at this point, what I will do is I'll just request my fellow panelists to just come in with very brief and introductory remarks of maybe 3 minutes, where I'd like to hear about their perspective in terms of one or two key points that they have on this. So on this, could I start with Mr. Alok Sharma, who's Executive Director, Center for High Technology. Mr. Sharma.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roy. Well, you already set the tone that our Honorable Prime Minister has given us two tasks. One is Atmanirbhar Bharat by 2047, and then net zero by 2070. So these targets, like to me actually, we started way back in 2005 regarding hydrogen, and that time a lot of apprehensions were there, that why hydrogen, why you are working on this, and a lot of questions were there. But slowly we set up we did a lot of projects in the area of hydrogen. We set up the first station in Indian Oil R&D Center, and then the second station at Dwarka. We did a lot of studies on hydrogen blending with CNG. And then slowly, there are now projects on fuel cell bus demonstration, and also on hydrogen production in a big way, like the big electrolyzers are being set up, even at the demonstration scale. And a lot of, like GHCO, you must have heard about this, that green hydrogen consumption obligations are coming up. So refineries are now going to set up a lot of hydrogen plants based on electrolysis. So about 1,25,000 of tons per annum of hydrogen is being targeted by 2030. So this is a big aim, and to me, basically the main challenges in the main, like opportunities and challenges both are there. But first I will touch upon the opportunities. Like opportunities, there are opportunities to manufacture electrolyzers in India. So a lot of companies are approaching, even they are approaching CST to take this forward, and we are having some joint meetings with some of the prospective Indian companies also, so that they can come up, the foreigners can come up and they set up the facilities in India. Then the opportunities are there for one of the main aspect which I see that electrolyzers supply will be an issue. Though the targets of 2030 are very ambitious, but I don't know the supply of electrolyzers, that can be an issue because all the electrolyzer manufacturers are right now, they are under pressure, and their orders are totally booked. And the delivery timelines are really, they are going to, I don't know how we are going to meet these 2030 targets. Regarding one aspect, main aspect of hydrogen, which is a big challenge, I think, is the transportation. See, I can give you example that we are producing hydrogen in refineries, say about $1. Now it is about $2 because of natural gas price increase. But what we get at the, like for the labs and other places is about $10. We are buying at about 700 rupees a kg. So that you can see the main issue is there on the transportation side or the storage side. So a lot of work needs to be done on the hydrogen transportation and storage. And opportunities are there. There are like blinding mandates may also come in the natural gas line. There is also a ISO 193 being set up. I am part of that. I am the convener of that ISO 193, where hydrogen blending will be there for in the CNG lines. So that will also set like the tone for the hydrogen economy in India. So as far as CST is concerned, CST is funding a lot of projects in the area of hydrogen. We have recently given about 100 crores to Indian Oil Corporation for a fuel cell bus demonstration projects where 15 fuel cell buses will be running, and they are being developed indigenously. Parallelly, they will be setting up about 90 nm cube per hour of electrolyzer facility, which will have all the three types of electrolyzers. Like these will be alkaline, then you must have heard about PEM, and the recent technology of solid oxide electrolytic cell. So SOEC, I think, is the future because see, in the current electrolysis of alkaline or PEM, the energy consumption is about 5 units per nm cube. But as we go to SOEC, though it's at a development stage, the energy consumption comes down to 3.2 units per nm cube. So there's a big difference, and I think SOEC can take the future in the area of electrolysis. I think that's it from my side to start with.
Thanks very much. That's a lot of interesting areas, and I will ask you further on this. I think you brought up some important points on the electrolyzer challenges, the energy security that we're looking at, Make in India program. There is a PLI scheme being worked on for electrolyzers. So that's, of course, a very key area, and anyone looking at electrolyzer, green hydrogen implementation in whether it's refineries or steel plants is actually looking at this question of where the electrolyzers will come from, and who's going to do the estimation, the planning, and all of that. So let me quickly jump to Sunil Patel, Senior Director, Solution Consulting. He's with Aspen Technology. Sunil, your
thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I come from a software solutions company. So the way we look at today here is the scaling up the hydrogen, green hydrogen manufacturing processes. I think we have a net zero targets, which probably we all can know. We know that we can meet that with the green hydrogen, but at what cost? So the challenges in front of us, at how do we address that, right? Because green energy, although we call it a green, it still requires an energy, and that's a renewable source energy. So it's not that straightforward, and as Ms. Raji rightly mentioned, right, how do we get the electrolyzers quickly? There's a shortage, there's a lot of electrolyzers in market, but then are they really meeting the production cost? And second aspect is about the scaling up. How do we help enable the owners as well as engineering companies to scale up the hydrogen manufacturing, right, specifically around green hydrogen? And third aspect for us is about safety. It's not about manufacturing, but it's about transportation, storage, and of course the end user. So these are the key aspects which we would like to discuss in today's panel discussion. So bringing down the CapEx and OpEx, safety, and scaling up. I think these are the key things which we would like to discuss here.
Thanks so much. Could we move on to Ravi Kumar, is Chief General Manager, Corporate R&D Center, Bharat Petroleum Corporation. Or sorry, he's joining in virtually.
Good afternoon. So,
hi, good afternoon. We can hear you.
It's a very interesting subject, and we have been debating this particular topic for quite some time. And the time has come really for practicality of this particular technology. At BPCL R&D, we started in a small way, this hydrogen usage with a small auto, and there were two types of hydrogen transport we used. One is based on canister, where we stored hydrogen in the form of metal hydride, and then as during the course of its operation, it gets released, and that was used. And other was is normal, like a high pressure HCNG, the way IOC, etc. has done. So similarly, we have demonstrated this. This experience, basically what we understood was it is feasible to use hydrogen as a fuel, but the cost and the paraphernalia that is required for storage and operation is huge. And it requires basically simplification. And as my predecessor mentioned, the CapEx and OpEx issues have to be sorted out. By doing this, I think we can make it a reality and achieve the green hydrogen mandate objectives. This is from my side.
Thanks very much. Can I move on to Rajiv Agarwal, Executive Director, Technical for Engineers India Limited.
Very good afternoon to good afternoon to all the audiences. I think because this green hydrogen concept is basically coming because of the net zero target that is because of the climate change is being forced upon by the environmentalist, and as a part of this, I mean, it's industry's responsibility that we move towards net zero. While for net zero, I mean, there is a...
Can you just hold the mic a little closer?
It's a multiple strategies that needs to be worked out to achieve that net zero. And the country is working in the direction. One is biofuels, where a lot of work is being done. Then the electric vehicles is one of the areas which will help us to reduce CO2 emission. And green hydrogen is also one part of the same, is one of the strategies towards the net zero. So, and I think with India targeting maybe around 500 gigawatt of solar power, the mission that has been sent by Prime Minister for the green hydrogen mission is something which is a very, very doable kind of a thing. And green hydrogen is going to play a big role in the near future. As the moderator in the initial setting tone for this discussion said that we have about 6 million tons of hydrogen consumption in these two basic industries. One is the petroleum industry, and second is the fertilizer industry. And considering that, I think the petroleum industry will be the first one to adopt green hydrogen, considering that they are already in the mode of setting up of several pilot plants that they have already started work on. And I think as my co-panelist also said that there are some technological issues. Some of the technologies are still in infancy. And of course, the cost of the green hydrogen is maybe 3 times more than the gray hydrogen that the industry is currently using. So all these will be definitely the challenges which need to be looked into, and maybe the various companies have said that they are going to target maybe $1 per kg of hydrogen by 2030. So which we hope will give a lot of impetus of adoption of the green hydrogen by the industry. And I think the petroleum industry will be the first one to start for the adoption of the green hydrogen, the way the things are working out to be. So that's all I want to tell you.
Thank you so much. Can I go over to you now, Shantanu Som? He's President Engineering, GE Gas Power Asia.
Hey, Prashanto, first of all, thank you. And thank you to GRPC for having me in here today. Look, this is a humbling moment, right? We all are in a time and a space in the industry where this major change is happening. I have been in this particular industry for about 27 plus years. This is the first time I feel energized as this huge transformation is taking place. And I think if we do this right, and I'm trying to use this word cautiously, if we do this right, probably we will be creating the stepping stone for a greener future. And when you look at the power industry today, um, in the power industry as such, 40% of the carbon emission happens from us, right? Um, the way different industries are embracing this, or different countries are embracing this net zero target, it's a multi-speed thing, it's a multi-phased approach. The way I feel is before even waiting for a green hydrogen to become affordable, easy to transport, easy to store, sustainable, scalable, right? Instead of waiting for that time to happen today, there are a lot of things we can do as a short-term solution today, right? We can play with the generation mix that we got: coal, nuke, hydros, renewables, gas. How do we do the right mix so that our net zero emission, we are reducing the gap, right? That's number one. Number two is digital, and I'm sure Sunil is from digital. I mean, he would appreciate. There's a lot of things that we can do in the digital space so that the amount of energy which we are generating versus consuming versus losing, there's a smartness around it, right? That's the second space. The third space could be our infrastructure building. As we are working towards going towards a greener hydrogen, how do we make our grids smarter, more efficient? We lose about 30% plus on our grid today, right? So there are a lot of small things which we can do right now while the carbon neutral fuel becomes more affordable, sustainable, scalable, right? I think I'll tee that up, and maybe we'll have more questions as we go during the panel discussion, right?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Shantanu. Yeah, great start and great points. I just want to check if Dr. Karen Landmark is joined in, or is she joining in a little? I understand she was joining in a little later in the. Okay, if not, let's get into the conversation. So I think this is it's a great start. We've got a few very key points, and I think it's interesting that we're discussing green hydrogen in this event. Which is predominantly, in the industry of the petrochemicals side. And it so happens that the refineries are the largest consumer, 54% we saw of the hydrogen being made today. So I think it would be interesting to see what all is going to possibly push this transition from gray to possibly blue and more importantly green, more importantly from the national green hydrogen priorities kind of concept. So that's something I'd like to know. We've heard a little bit about that. There is of course a mandate which is in the works. of requiring a percentage of this. I think it's 25% to be sourced from green and renewable sources. So essentially, green hydrogen. I think that's one starting thing that I'd like to say for this industry. Going beyond that, of course, fertilizers brings up the point that ammonia in some ways is a little easier to handle than hydrogen, but in other ways, of course, it's corrosive, etc. So there is green ammonia also as an alternative, which has different storage challenges and opportunities. And what about other industries which emerge from this? Because this industry is huge, and one thing we've been seeing is that scaling has been a problem. We've simply not got to scale on projects, on hydrogen-related projects. The things we're talking about, for example, transportation, okay, fuel cell buses, etc. These are fairly tiny in terms of the scale of projects. They're important. They're very, I mean, for example, NTPCs, I think, working with 10 buses on the Delhi-Jaipur and the Ladakh route. And Kerala is also talking about return to base trucking operations, etc. But China, for example, has 10,000 buses, which are, that was last year, and the figure probably is higher this year. So in terms of scale, we've seen scale as far as hydrogen goes clearly in this sector, the refineries. What else? Where do you see scale being tackled? That's what I'd like to first put to my panelists. And I think it's also interesting that we have a mix here of a lot of the key traditional industries. And Shantanu, you're associated with the power industry. And I think it's very interesting to look at where the power fits into this roadmap of the net zero thing. I mean, India clearly, right now, we are at about 70% coal. And there is a fairly ambitious roadmap of going to 50% by 2030. Okay, but what all will go into that, and will better, cleaner technologies, FGD, carbon capture, etc., actually put us in a complementary roadmap with technologies like green hydrogen? I don't know, would you actually, Shantanu, like to go with that first? And I'd like to ask how you see this aspect of it to my fellow panelists.
Yeah,
Shantanu. Yeah.
Sure, Prasad. I can give a spin on that. So look, when you look at the power market, and you take a look at the globe, you take a look at the Asia market. Asia itself is 24 plus markets, right? And you do a 3-decade view for the globe, a 10-year view for the Asia market. You see a similar pattern, but there's a little bit of distinction as well, right? One is growth. Both the markets are growing, right? There's about 2.3 times growth when you look at the 3-decade view for the globe. The demand for energy is going to grow, right? When you look at Asia, it's about 45% growth. Now, majority of the growth is happening in the renewable install base. There's a lot of renewable which is coming as an installation, as a capacity add, but can renewable hold and nurture the grid as it goes through the cycle? Wind doesn't blow every day, sun doesn't shine every day, right? So who is going to be that muscle power that's going to hold the grid when the renewable feeds are not in favor, right? So that's one. Number two is, if you see, compared to the globe, in our side of the world, Asia, we still are coal heavy, right? You pick any country, you would see at least 50% plus coal dependency, right? We know that when you compare a coal plant with a combined cycle gas plant, and if you start, and that's where the generation mix concept comes in, if as a grid you start deploying more gas, and gas as in gas combined cycle plant, high efficiency is good to have, and without hydrogen or without any carbon neutral fuel, just the methane natural gas, you still save about 40 to 45% of the emission today as compared to a coal plant, right? As you make the gas machines smarter, you bring in the HA technology, which today in the GE portfolio is can give you a 64% efficiency on a combined cycle. You bring that in, you're talking of at least 60% reduction from an existing coal plant emissions, right? You then can bring in the blends of hydrogen. You can start with 5%, gradually scale it to 10%. And as you scale up the percentages, there are a couple of mixes which come onto the table, right? One is the affordability, scalability, storage, but then also the handling piece, right? Somebody talked about in the panelists around safety, right? So the leak rates, how the flanges need to be, what kind of valves need to come in, what kind of classifications need to happen. Piping could become permeable because hydrogen can eat into the metal. How do you make sure that the pipes remain intact, right? So there's a little bit of investment which goes in, a little bit of effort which goes in as you get the blends higher and higher, right? So what I'm trying to lay out here is this has to be a stepped journey. There will be nano steps we take, and there will be places where we will be ready to take that big step, right? But if we do not take those nano steps, we will not be increasing our credits. And I think, Prashanta, you hit on that. Um, I've seen in some of the countries where the government or the regulator comes in between, they put on the table an incentive scheme, a subsidy scheme to walk gencos in this direction, or generating companies in this direction. They deploy carbon taxes because this technology is not cheap, right? Be it electrolyzer, be it the handling storage, everything needs energy. It's not going to be cheap, right? So as you incentivize it, as you bring in carbon taxes, and we're kind of seeing if it's $10 plus on the metric ton of CO2 deployed as a tax, it becomes more and more sensible and affordable to gradually switch towards that direction, right? Um, so those things would help. And I always bring this analogy that what wind is today was not the case 15 years back or maybe 10 years back. There was a lot of infrastructural support mechanism which went in, which took wind energy from where it is today, I mean, from where it was to where it is today. I think a similar kind of effort would be needed as our generating companies are trying to move their needle towards gradually towards net zero. It's not going to be absolute zero day one. It's going to be a gradual shift. So I thought I'll tee that up, Prashanta.
Great. I think that's a lot of interesting points. I want to pick up some of those. I'm going to park one of those to take up a little further down, in terms of the great complexity, which is going to look at, factoring in where you have a fairly straightforward, you've got 70% of power coming from coal. Now you're bringing in more and more of RE. We are bringing in hydrogen into the mix. Hydrogen is potential for grid storage as well. The integration of all in this and the R&D challenges and the technology challenges that but I want to just come now, and I'd like to put this to the rest of the panel on the energy security question. I mean, clearly, energy security is something that the country is very obsessed about, and ethanol, for example, has been one big point there that, locally made ethanol to be able to displace up to 20% of the fuel going into vehicles. As far as hydrogen is concerned, where are we on that? Maybe on the research side, we could start with that on the electrolyzers, or if you're looking at, so for example, a lot of the RE supply chain is very China dependent. The renewable energy, the solar photovoltaic cells, the batteries. Now, even with electrolyzers going forward, right now there is not much manufacturing here at all. But obviously the plan is to have it. There's a PLI scheme in. But again, the rare earths and other materials going into that, okay, there are supply chain questions and issues. It may not be China, it may be somewhere else which is dependent. So I'd just like to know from your perspective from the panel here on the stage, as well as Dr. Ravi Kumar, what are the key concerns there, and how do you see those actually going forward? Is there a advantage or an edge that hydrogen could potentially give us because it's a new area and we expect to be evolving these technologies and going forward manufacturing them with support from the government, with PLI schemes, etc. Anybody like to go at that from the panel here, or Dr. Ravi Kumar?
Yeah, I think all said and done, everyone is accepting that hydrogen is going to be a reality in future. and it is going to be a fuel uh, immediate in next decade or so. But what is our preparedness with respect to this? What kind of supports are required? So this is a debate point. But still, my understanding and my view on this particular subject is, say, like earlier solar energy, some 15, 20 years back, when we set up our first solar plant, power cost was 15 to 20 rupees or something like that. Then that cost came down quite substantially over a period of time, and the efficiencies are also improving. So it is hydrogen is going to be a reality, but it is still evolving subject. From there is a lot R&D to be done, and a lot of experience need to be gained. In view of this, I think institutes like IOC and OMCs and BPCL, they should all join together and develop ecosystem for this particular thing and gain experience quickly. And based on the experience, we need to move forward. And there are a lot of issues, particularly with respect to scale up and indigenization of electrolyzer system. Majority of these electrolyzers are manufactured outside, and it is very cost intensive proposition to set up this. And how do we indigenize this particular thing, and can we have our own electrolyzers development system? And over and above, what kind of green hydrogen utilization and infrastructure systems that need to be developed? These are the two important questions that need to be answered, and we need to gain experience by having more pilots in this particular area. This is what my view is.
Okay, terrific. I think, again, great points. Now, you said utilization. So on the use cases, I mean, clearly use cases are going to be a huge thing. Right now, a lot of the discussion that's happening in terms of targets, whether it's 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen in addition to today's 7 million metric tons of gray hydrogen, what are the use cases which are going to be actually consuming this? So we know now today it's entirely centered on these two sectors, okay? But going forward, we know that there's going to be steel and so on. So the size of these use cases and demonstration scale projects, is anybody able to talk about projects where, I mean, they see potential there, I mean, on the panel in terms of, projects which you've spoken about in terms of, what the government is supporting. What are the sort of demonstration scale projects that we can see? Because going forward, beyond these two sectors, steel is a very significant area. Cement is another very major area with high potential. Transportation, going forward, there is expectation, and there are various challenges. We'll come to the safety and standards as another thing I want to come back to you, Dr. Ravi Kumar. But in terms of scale projects, any suggestions or thoughts how that part could be taken forward? Because we simply don't have large projects which are there here in terms of pilots. Any inputs there from anyone on the panel?
See, I mean,
Yes, please, go ahead.
I mean, EL is definitely taking some of the projects in the area of green hydrogen that we are setting up a 20 megawatt electrolyzer plant for one of the refiners, and we being a kind of a PMC for them, our role will be that based on we will do a licensor selection along with the I mean, it will be a license along with the EPC supply that will be done by us for the client, and based on that, we'll prepare a final DFR for the final project approval. Another project that we are doing is already, I think, approved by the board of the client, and will be a PMC, will be providing a PMC service for a 10 megawatt plant. It is for GAIL that we will be doing. So, I mean, some of these projects are already coming up, and I think they should take shape in another 20 months time, I believe. And I think these are the starting projects which will set up the tone for at least the use of hydrogen in the petroleum industry, I must say that. And besides that, I mean, some of the projects that we are doing is in the blending of hydrogen. Right now it is, these pilot projects are being set up with gray hydrogen, but finally that gray hydrogen will be replaced by the green hydrogen. And that is how the hydrogen, green hydrogen will start flowing into the CGD circuits for the domestic use and the industrial use. And we have also taken up a pilot project. That is a study that we have taken up for GAIL for blending of green hydrogen in the natural gas networks. And currently, some of the, in one of the pilots, they have already started blending 2% hydrogen in the CGD network based on our recommendations. So, these are the projects that are coming up, and I think more companies are looking for hydrogen blending in the CGD networks. Adani is one of the areas. They are also looking for this.
Okay, terrific. That's very helpful. Thanks. Anybody else on ideas for? So, if you look at the problem statement a little differently, what are we aiming for? So, 2030, there are some targets we are discussing. There are some figures which may be a little arbitrary at this point, like 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen. There's no clear mapping to the demand side. So that's challenging because when you look at electrolyzer capacity and you look at PLI schemes, etc., you then have to map it to that figure, which may be a little hypothetical. So it's obviously a very great idea to be able to visualize or have very clear projects in mind, which are, hydrogen clusters, hydrogen valleys, etc. Okay, so another way to put this question is this sector, clearly, what will it take to actually move aggressively to green hydrogen? Is it the government mandate? Will that do it? Is there anything else that's required in terms of the cost? The cost of green hydrogen, that's dependent on electrolyzer capex, it's dependent on RE. RE power cost is going down fairly quickly. So that's less of an issue. We can visualize RE being at near zero, and you're just looking at electrolyzer capacity. Any thoughts on this?
As Mr. Agarwal said, that already a lot of initiatives have been taken up. As far as OMCs are concerned, they have already taken the lead, and but the target of 5 billion by 2030, I think is too ambitious, because these oil companies have taken the initiative. I can just give a figure that by 2025, the target is about 31,000 tons per annum. And by 2030, it is 1,26,000 tons per annum. So all the oil companies are taking initiatives like IOCL. They are setting up one plant in Panipat and one in Mathura. So that's about 5,000 tons per annum. This is about 10% of what Mathura refinery produces. So 10% is what we are targeting at most of the OMCs. But the total comes out to be about 1,26,000, which is way below the 5 million target. Ultimately, there will be like fertilizer companies and other companies will be there, but I don't know, 5 million will be a target to achieve, I think.
Yeah, I think few aspects on the scale up, safety and target. I don't go into the details because we all talked about the targets and net zero. But being a technology provider, right, being in the space of modeling and simulation, some of the aspects, the way we are working, we are actually co-innovating and working with the owners, EPC companies like EIL and others, as well as the technology providers to accelerate the design, manufacturing, and up to the operations. So unless we have that in place, unless we accelerate the design, unless we optimize the design, and then scale up to the point where we reduce the capex by, let's say, by 50%, 60%, right? It's not going to scalable because cost is an important aspect. And in order to do that, we actually trying to templatize the design aspect. Worldwide, if you see the data points, right, there are about 350, 400 large green hydrogen projects announced, right? But when are they going to be reality? Is it next 1 year, 2 year, 5 year? How much time it's going to take? So how do we, instead of doing re-engineering for each and every project, right? Can we templatize? Can we have a process defined with certain electrolyzers, right? And then try to, we call that as end-to-end optimization, right? From design, concept, all the way up to the operations and optimization in the plant. So how do we do that? Is the entire value chain, right? So that's something we look at from a digital solutions point of view and we're working towards. Second aspect, I think the safety, which we talked earlier, I think some of the fellow panels also mentioned. While we do that, right, now when it's going to be reality, because it's not just manufacturing of hydrogen, it's about transportation, it's about storage, right? And it's a lot to do with the temperature, cryogenic handling, right? So how we deal with that? Because at the end of the day, we all can talk about sustainability, but safety is the topmost priority for everyone, right? So today, okay, there are things which we do as a part of safety, but unless we have this digital solutions, right, which really can model your processes and try to ensure that the process is safety, right, I think the regulatory and compliance will come into picture. I think that's another aspect to look at it. So being a digital solution provider, we as an Aspentech, we probably actually work with a lot of people in this space, from energy companies, from licensors, as well as from EPC companies, to co-innovate this technology and accelerate the hydrogen manufacturing process. The objective here is basically to reduce the cost, capex reduction, and how do we scale up that, right? Not just like 1 megawatt or 1 gigawatt, how do we make it to 1 to 10 in next 5 to 10 years? That's the objective.
Okay, very good points there. So I want to take up that safety and standards thing, and I also want to break for any questions from the audience. On the storage, I think much of the hydrogen work here and also on the vehicles on that side for FCEVs is basically gaseous hydrogen. I don't think there's cryogenic transportation very much. That is very much the case elsewhere. In the US, they're using a lot of cryogenic transportation and even onboard cryogenic systems for buses and so on. So at this point, it's mainly gaseous. But the standards and safety question, of course, totally remains. So in terms of development of standards, I don't think BIS has really gone there yet. They're exploring. So that's a significant gap area. I don't know, Dr. Ravi Kumar, would you have any thoughts or inputs on that, on India's role and where we are as far as standardization is concerned, especially around the safety and transportation side?
So I don't have much to tell in this space. What I feel is that we need to have some pilots, quick pilots, so that we'll gain experience in this space, so that we can have our own standards quickly.
Right, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. Could I take a break for any questions from the audience at this point? Does anybody have anything to, yeah, okay, we've got a question there. How do they do it? Is there a mic that can go there? Okay, and anyone else meanwhile, so that we know where you are? Okay, there's a gentleman in front too. Okay, you can start with the one at the back actually. All right, if there's some confusion, sorry, but okay, after that, please, the gentleman at the back and then in the middle. Yes,
Can I
go
start?
ahead, sir.
Yeah. I'm KK Jain, President Telgo IT company, and I had been working in the CST prior to this. So a lot of job has been started related to green hydrogen or the hydrogen economy in general. And few projects have been awarded, which EDCST has rightly said. One for like hydrogen blending into the CNG circuit. There is some other trials are also going for hydrogen into natural gas, which will be going to the CGD. So just I wanted to know, is there any R&D work that has been being done? Say if I supply the 100% hydrogen to the domestic circuit, is it possible to supply that 100% hydrogen using the existing CGD network? And if yes, then what are the changes that will be required in the safety side as well as say in the burner side?
So first of all, you were asking about hydrogen blending with natural gas and then moving from there to 100% hydrogen using the same network. Okay, that I understand is a no-no, but I'd let the experts pick up from here. Anybody have an input on that?
See, 100% is still quite far away. I mean, the study that I told you, we are targeting about 20% blending. And even 20% blending has a lot of challenges in terms of the materials of construction, because hydrogen being a very small molecule. So, I mean, it penetrates into the steel and then it causes kind of a cracking. So, all the current CGD networks definitely are not suitable for very high blending of hydrogen. They can tolerate up to some blending. So that is what is a part of study we are blending, where we are taking up this study to see what components, because the CGD network involves a lot of components and even the end users. So as a part of the study, we are seeing that what will be the impact of hydrogen blending, and we see that 10% definitely we can go in near future, but 20% also with some component replacement can be done. But of course, I mean, 100% is, I think, quite far away, in the sense that the long distance pipeline network definitely has to be looked into. The current materials that have been used for those pipeline network is definitely not suitable for those. But the new pipelines that will be built up, that can be built up at least for those hydrogen. That is what I can suggest.
See, in this direction, we have discussion. We have already had discussion with some of the companies, and SNAM in Italy, they have already done a lot of studies up to 50% of blending of hydrogen in the CNG network. And as far as like, there is no standard as such right now on blending, like blending mandates in the natural gas line. As I told you, there is a ISO 193 which is having a technical group on hydrogen blending in CNG pipelines, and I am part of that. And we are now in discussion with various countries, and whoever has taken the initiative and how they have approached this and what percentage maximum they have used. Because see, ultimately it will also depend, like CNG network metallurgy may not be same in all of the countries. It can be different. Metallurgy can be different. So we are getting those details and working on this. But at present, I think only 2% by volume is what is allowed. 0.2%, I think, as per the Indian IS standard and ISO standard also. So work is going on. I think there will be a mandate from ISO side what maximum can be allowed in the natural gas line. So that will take about a year.
Thank you so much. Could we go over to the back? There was a question there. Yeah. And then we'll come back to you, sir.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, please.
I'm Joshi from Sulzer. I have a basic question related to the manufacturing. What is the difference between hydrogen produced out of seawater by very mature technology like membrane cells or any other technology, which is very, very mature? You know, you have been making caustic chlorine plants, which manufactures hydrogen from seawater. What is this green hydrogen? How it is different from the hydrogen produced from caustic plants?
So I'm not very sure. Are you talking of electrolysis of seawater or some other process?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, caustic is produced out of electrolysis from seawater only.
Okay, what's the energy source?
Electrical, I think so.
Yeah, what's the energy? I mean, what is it renewable energy? Is it solar? Is it wind?
No, I think it's electrical energy.
Okay, so green hydrogen is basically being defined as hydrogen which is produced with renewable energy and water. And India, in this Ministry of Power guidelines, it's additionally said that energy which has been banked under these rules, up to 30 days, etc., that energy can also be used, and that is also going to be classified as green hydrogen. So essentially that. I mean, finally, the hydrogen that you get, I think the hydrogen you're describing is probably going to be classified as blue if it's from seawater, but it's a non-renewable source of power. Hydrogen itself is the same, it's identical, there's no difference, there's no color. We just classify it as color based on its, the kind of provenance of that hydrogen, as it were. Similarly, gray, I mean, the hydrogen is identical, but the source is fossil fuels without carbon capture.
Yeah, I think, Prasanto, you're bringing a good point here. Hydrogen as such don't have any color. I think the process which we use to produce hydrogen gives the color to it. But essentially, so long you're capturing the carbon that you produce as a byproduct of the process as you go ahead and produce hydrogen, you would move from a gray towards a blue towards a turquoise towards probably a little more greener hydrogen. But green hydrogen essentially is where you don't have anything to do with carbon, right? You're using electrolysis process altogether. But to your point, Prasanto, um, today the SMR process, which the oil and gas industry uses a lot, right? The what do you call the gasification process, 100% biomass kind of thing, right? Which is essentially the white hydrogen, if you will, right? The turquoise being pyrolysis of methane. There are a lot of different processes which people are exploring. But essentially, so long you're able to capture the CO2 that comes out as a byproduct, I think this is going to help into the net zero effect, right?
So since you brought that up, whether it's steam methane reforming or any of this, how established and efficient is the carbon capture process? I mean, for example, I know in coal thermal plants, we're really talking of FGD, but not so much carbon capture. So here, is the carbon capture developed and efficient enough to have a substantial roadmap for blue hydrogen, where you've basically captured all the carbon?
So,
Any thoughts on
so
that?
interesting question, Prashanto. So, carbon capture is a huge chemical plant sitting next to either a power plant or we call it a DSC, direct air capture, right? It sucks in the air up in the atmosphere, trying to pull out all the CO2 in the air. Now, if you look at technology wise, there is a technology. The amine technology that we use today, which is kind of more industrialized, does exist, right? Solid solvent is more of an exploration. It's not yet there. But the amine technology is usable. The point is the scalability, the entire CCUS or carbon capture and sequestration space, if you look at, it's a heavy capex oriented project. Number one. Number two, not all countries in the world are blessed with land, right? It requires a significant amount of land. It requires energy for the carbon dioxide stripping from the flue gas. So that is pulled from the steam or the combined cycle um, steam production, right? Which in fact affects the heat rate of the plant. So there's a few knock-on effect which happens onto the process efficiency. But to be very honest, if you look at the run rate, right, you step back and look at the net zero run rate of the market, the way I see it is generation mix, renewable gas, hydro, nuke, the entire play around that is going to be probably the step one. Step two probably would be the CCUS industrialization and more around the utilization and sequestration piece. That is what the headwind is in that technology. And I think the third space would be embracing hydrogen at a higher blend. 5 to 10%, 17%, easy deal. It's doable. We have gas plants or the gas turbines running in a petroleum industry. Actually, petroleum industry is far ahead in the space, though, where we are doing low BTU fuel consumption. In Korea, we got a 6B running, which is using currently 94% hydrogen. So there are spaces where hydrogen could be easily used, but there are spaces where we have to take it slow, given the affordability, given the scalability, sustainability piece, right? We're doing few projects on hydrogen across the globe, including a couple in China, Hong Kong, a few in US. We actually did a recent project in Long Ridge where we did 5% hydrogen, a couple of hours of run on a 7H8 Auto 2. Pretty big machine, right? So some footprints are being created here and there, but in my view, petroleum industry is slightly ahead on the hydrogen, but CCUS probably is going to come a little bit ahead of the hydrogen space.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful because there's been a lot of debate on this front because, the mandate and the push is very much from the PMO level. It is green hydrogen and green only. but the reality is that, you've got gray and you've got various other shades and you've got a lot of blue potentially there, especially in this whole industry, the petrochemical sector. Dr. Karen Landmark, glad to see you. I see you joined us. Thank you. And could we start with a quick introduction of yourself and Greenstat, and maybe a few quick perspectives on the subject which you're aware of?
Sure. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sorry to be late into the session. I think I can say with certainty that that my voice is truly on the green hydrogen side, and I think maybe that's okay in a setting like today. But we are of course aware of the benefits of CCS and other shades of colors when it comes to hydrogen. But to begin with myself, my name is Karen Landmark, as I was introduced as, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for a Norwegian company called Greenstat. I also hold a position as Chair of the Board for Greenstat Asia, which is serving the Asian market, and I'll get back to that shortly. Greenstat, we say that we are a green energy company. The headquarters is in Norway, but we do have international activity, including, of course, the Indian market. Greenstat work throughout the whole value chain of green hydrogen, which means that we are on the energy input side. We build wind and solar facilities, and we also serve the end market. We have a concept for a green energy station. But our main kind of what we refer to as our green heart is green hydrogen production. We have over the last 2 years entered the Indian market, and I think we believe that, I mean, we're humble towards all the knowledge and expertise that we meet, but we still think that we brought with us some knowledge that is relevant now in the green transition in India, and that's particularly linked to hydrogen production, which has over 100-year long history in Norway, and also that of safety and security measures that has been developed and standardized over decades by the Norwegian industry partners, particularly offshore oil and gas. So that was just a little bit about myself and a little bit about Greenstat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and great to have you here. In fact, I think the Scandinavian countries have been very impressive with their fairly long-term view, vision, and execution of renewable power. We had quite a few visitors from, so for example, I think Denmark, our Prime Minister has just gone over there, and we had this whole delegation from there, and I was amazed to know that they have some 20 people in India from the government who are just looking at wind and solar energy projects. So I mean, there's a lot of interest, and I'm sure with Norway too, there's a lot of scope for collaboration and exchange of ideas and technology, and we have similar directions. I think this is an area which is relatively new still, so everyone's looking at supply chains around electrolyzers and the development of standards and so on. So that's a major. So I'm going to come back to you. We were just taking in some questions from the audience.
No problem.
Sorry. Yeah. Could we just get the mic over to the gentleman here, please?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rakesh. So I have a typical question. Hope this is something very much into the initial context discussions. This is regarding the raw material source. I mean, basically, what are the hydrogen which you are targeting for? We are targeting through the electrolysis route, which eventually means that we will be using the water as a raw material. The same water is also is a basic necessity for the livelihood or the existence of all the human beings or even the plants and everyone. So how do you really need to ensure that the water which is required for the livelihood is not disturbed in the race of this hydrogen production?
Water, well, the water, it goes back to water. So that's the great thing about hydrogen. When you recombine it, you burn it, or you have the space shuttle powered by hydrogen, you get water back again. So in that sense, I don't think water itself is the problem here. It's primarily the energy. But I don't know if, I think Karen, this would be part maybe up your street. I think the question was that are we looking at depleting other resources in the process, especially water, if water is going to be a primary source of, well, the hydrogen through electrolysis? Karen, do you have a?
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah,
so the question was about the use of water as a resource into the hydrogen production, the production of green hydrogen.
Yeah, so I think we can just step back from that question and just address this slightly larger thing of how sustainable is this? I mean, is this a really sustainable shift, green hydrogen, where, one dimension, of course, he mentioned, which is water. The solar power is, well, that's renewable energy. So is it the holy grail of sustainability?
Well, thank you so much for that extremely relevant question. And I did my PhD in sustainability, so this is something that I kind of argue with myself every day, because it's not necessarily sustainable in all locations. So I think the planning of all new industry from this day and forward needs to take into account resource use, also the creation of industrial symbiosis, the creation of energy hubs, the use of areas and land, which is, we know now from the UN point of view that we don't really have any more nature to use, not even for energy production. So there will always be a battle between goods here. And I think what we have to do is just take that into the planning from the very start. When it comes to water in particular, there are ways to solve that because there are also technology you can use, you can reuse, and you can also use the excess water to other production of other things, or put it into use. But I think it's a matter of thinking that I mean, on a threshold that has been defined as kind of the defining decade for humanity, I think that all industry planning and development needs to take into account the ESG perspectives. And I don't think there is one size fits all, because it will depend on the location. I would say that in India, where you have areas that are really big on solar energy, you will have excess energy, and then it makes perfect sense to produce green hydrogen in certain places in India and the world. And in some places, it's potentially not the best way of using the energy. Then maybe the energy should be used directly to something else. So I think it's just a really, really, it's a question that we need to keep high on the agenda for the next decade, I think. And I think we all need to come up with good solutions to that problem.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was actually a pretty deep question, because if you're setting up, for example, green hydrogen clusters or valleys in the Rajasthan desert, you've got a lot of renewable energy there, but you need the source for the water. And your atmosphere too doesn't have a great deal of humidity to be able to try and capture it from there. So great question, thank you for that. Any other last questions? We've got, I think, a few minutes. We started about 10 minutes late, but we want to wrap up more or less on time. Yes,
last
go
question.
ahead.
To me, overall, it looks that these efforts, the top priority, this carbon capture, that is seems to be important till cheap power becomes available, like solar or wind, because that is not available in abundance. So what are the efforts, because it is not a CCUS industry point of view, industries may not go for investment, even if it is a big, so at national level or maybe government level, any efforts to build some carbon capture network. So that would be probably really helpful in reducing or maybe carbon abatement point of view till this cheap power becomes available.
Okay, I'm going to just park that and see if there are any more quick questions. It's a little outside syllabus, but we have discussed carbon capture, so we can definitely take it up. Anybody else? Any last question? Okay, there's one at the end, please. Could we have the mic over there? I wish we had a second mic, because we're losing a little bit of time. Yes, sir, go ahead. Do just introduce yourself, please. Sorry, is the mic reaching the back? Don't tell me the mic has vanished.
Yeah.
Okay, no, we've got it.
Hello.
Yes, sir, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm Narendra Agnihotri from HMAL. My question is regarding that for all the industries, the normal conventional fuels, gas, fuel oils, or natural gas is using as a fuel in the furnaces, all these things. Suppose we are using the hydrogen, then we can find out the whole life cycle of this one. Suppose we are using the natural gas or conventional fuels, the CO2 is come out, and then again capturing the CO2, the utilization, then the whole cycle is required much more capex and opex also. If we are using the hydrogen, there is no CO2 is come out from there, then the cost of the hydrogen, we can compare with that with the conventional fuels also, or we are just calculating only the hydrogen, green hydrogen calculation. Maybe you understand the questions?
I'm sorry, I haven't quite got that. I know you're asking about a cost comparison and how you actually measure the cost of the hydrogen. What is going
because
into
we are comparing the cost of only green hydrogen production, which is around $5 or $6. But
correct.
If we are looking the whole life cycle from the conventional fuel, where the CO2 is also come out, then again we have to capture the CO2, require additional
All
fund.
Right. Okay, got it. Okay. Would you like to?
I think you are talking about carbon credits to be used for green hydrogen.
If we are using
That's
the
what he's saying, I think. So that can be done. Yes, of course. We can think over in that direction also. I think he's saying about that carbon credits to be used for green hydrogen.
And because hydrogen is around 3 times more heating value than the conventional fuel, like natural gas and all these things.
No, absolutely. I think the basic thing is with green hydrogen, it's a little simpler to get to the cost because, you've got capex, you've got the electrolyzers, you've got renewable energy. There is a certain map, the graph of renewable energy cost is going downward, maybe heading to near zero. So you can just look at the amortized cost of the capex and so on, and the distribution and support infrastructure. In the other things, you've got carbon, and as we are saying here, the carbon credits could be one factor there. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to his question. There was a question on the CO2 capture. So there is a project which has been taken up by Indian Oil at Gujarat Refinery. So they will be using the hydrogen, this CO2 produced in the hydrogen unit, and this will be taken up to the ONGC oil fields for enhanced oil recovery. So this is one of the projects which has been taken up. So this will be completed by 2024, the target.
Just to add to, I think, the question from the last gentleman, I mean, what he probably comparing the cost of green hydrogen versus the cost of the hydrogen that is produced after the CCUS, right? CCUS, in my opinion, which ultimately gives you the blue hydrogen, will be a transition phase. But ultimately, the green hydrogen will be the objective to meet the net zero, because when you do carbon capture, sequestration, these are all, still you are generating CO2. So ultimately, I think this will be only a transition mode. And as you probably said, that the cost will be less than over the green hydrogen route.
Yeah, but
ultimately, but finally, the final destination is the green hydrogen only.
Yeah, I think his point was also that along the way, you have a lot of other costs in that, when you're comparing the cost of the other. So gray hydrogen may be sub $1 per kg, etc. But there is the cost of carbon. So if you bring in carbon credits, as we were just saying, okay, then you are getting to, parity there, or some maybe sub parity there. Sunil, any thoughts from you on this question and some of the other things we discussed? We haven't come back.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's a balance, right? I think as my fellow panelist rightly pointed, it's a transition between blue to green, right? Today, yes, the blue hydrogen generates the CO2, and there is a cost associated there to capture that. But then at the same time, I think it's 3 to 4 times cheaper than green hydrogen, right? So when we transition from blue to green, there is an additional cost. So that's a challenge in front of us, that how do we bring that cost to the blue hydrogen level? And that's a balance we have to make today. I think his question again is, okay, one is a cheaper option, but then it will not meet our net zero ambition. But how do we meet that in future and by reducing the cost? But at the same time, I think you rightly pointed about the carbon credit. That's something probably can address your problem at the moment, but eventually it will not meet that problem. So at the end, I think, as he rightly said, Phenopal is basically about our target is green hydrogen. But how do you bring that cost down? CapEx and OpEx, right? It's, I think someone asked the question about it's $3 to $4, right? I was mentioning earlier about the scale up. I think some of the co-innovative projects we are working, and our targets are, can we bring down that below $2 per kg? That's something we should aim for.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap up with, if there are no more questions, with just this last question for quick last words from everybody. You know, we spoke about this earlier, the need for, where are the large use cases? And today for hydrogen, clearly the only two large use cases are with the refineries and fertilizer at 54 and 46% or something like that respectively. Okay, that's gray hydrogen. So when we move forward to green hydrogen and we are going to have, let's say, 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen by 2030, what would be, in your view, the largest use case? How do we get there? Would it be refineries? Would there be actually an aggressive shift from gray to green there on the refinery side, or is something else needed beyond the mandate? So that's the question I'll leave with you. You can choose to answer this in your last words, final words, or anything else. Karen, I will start with you, and since you joined last and you had very little time to speak, if there's anything else you want to also add into this in your last words, so I'll give a little more time. So let's start with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Roy. I'm really grateful to be able to join for just a little while, and it's really an interesting discussion. And as I said, our point of view is definitely that we need to move towards green hydrogen for many reasons. But I still think that both the refineries and the fertilizer industry will be very important in that path. So that will be the first large-scale projects from our point of view. And then I think many things will happen in parallel, and the markets will probably overlap each other once the cost is driven down by technology and also the prices of electricity, which has to be done, and including governmental incentives and a predictability in the market. So I think there's many things that has to happen at the same time, and I think that India is beautifully positioned to really become a global hub for green hydrogen production. And it's also extremely nice for us to see how forward-leaning the government are in these issues. And as you said, your honorable Prime Minister is in Scandinavia these days, and I think he shook hands with our Prime Minister just yesterday. And they were talking, among other things, about green hydrogen. So I think we are looking forward to cooperate with you all and be part of this green shift in India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Landmark. Shantanu, could I go over to you? And I'll just, place this additional point that, we started by saying that the Ministry of Power has actually come out with the first significant part of this hydrogen policy. So that's interesting. So clearly the power sector is a very key part of, that is the major component that goes in apart from the electrolyzers. So last thoughts from you on how you see the sector scaling up to 2030 in India.
So look, I think I agree with Dr. Kran. Most likely petroleum industry or the oil and refinery industry would be taking the first steps towards being the supplier or the source of hydrogen at an affordable price. But in the power sector, what I feel is there are a couple of ways we look at it, right? Pre-combustion and post-combustion, that's how we look at it, right? Post is where your CCUS technology comes into play, and pre is where managing the fuel, right? Although there's a lot of talk around ammonia and such, but definitely hydrogen has a lead on this. Handling hydrogen could be tricky given the characteristics that comes with, but it's doable. We in GE, we have about close to 100 plus machines running today with about 8 million operating hours, mainly in the petroleum industry, where we are doing certain blends of hydrogen, 5 to 17, to some cases, 90 plus, right? But if you look at hydrogen, it has a flip side too, It is not easy to detect. Flame scanning, right? It burns high at a higher temperature, so NOx becomes a headwind. You now got to do investment to manage NOx. So why I'm throwing this out is it's going to be a journey. But I agree that we want to go towards a green hydrogen scenario, but it will be a journey, and the journey has to be laid out well. If it is not going to be laid out well, then I think we will be talking about this topic and the progress would be slower. But to your point, Prashanto, I think the first step would be from the oil and gas industry because they are smarter in this fuel. They have been handling it for some time. They know the intricacies of this fuel. They are pretty smart in that. So I think they will lead that a bit more than rest of the industries, right?
Thank you so much. Dr. Ravi Kumar, last words from you.
Thank you. So as all panelists agreed that CapEx and OpEx operating costs are the major driving force for any transition. And someone has asked about CO2 emissions question. I
Yes.
think some questions regarding even solar power generation also. While manufacturing these solar panels, you end up spending a lot of energy. What about the emissions coming out from that energy? Perhaps we need to look at the overall CO2 emissions from cradle to grave so that we'll be comparing all these things on the same level. And of course, there must be a lot of developments that might have happened over a period of time. And renewable power is going to be the ultimate winner in all these CO2 emissions factors. So we need to take it with reality. And second, the prices of electricity, of solar energy are going to come down. And definitely it is going to be a big boost for refining industry. And the sooner we adopt, that is going to be better for us. And I added to this water usage, especially the places like Bombay, etc., where you don't have so much of availability. And of course, availability of seawater is there. How we can effectively use that water for producing hydrogen, this is a moot point. And most of our refineries are landlocked and basically the space constraint. Because of that, we cannot use solar or so much easily. So how we are going to, even if our intent is there, how we are going to move towards green hydrogen, this is a challenge. And these two major challenges, basically affordable electricity for hydrogen production, as well as availability of water. These are the two key challenges as far as hydrogen adoption in refining industry, especially for VPCL type of refineries where they are located close to cities, etc. So, but definitely the transition has to be made and beginning has to be done. That's what I can share with you. And regarding CO2, what are we going to do with the CO2 capture? Even if we go for some SMB, simulated moving bed, these kind of technologies we are looking at, they are very energy efficient and definitely cost effective also. But what are we going to do with the CO2 that we are going to capture? That is also has to be basically addressed. So these are the three key challenges that are coming to mind immediately on this topic.
Thank you so much. Rajiv Agarwal, once again, the last question that I left here is, do you think that this sector, the petroleum sector, could become the largest use case for green hydrogen by 2030? But feel free to adapt that question to your last words or the last words to the
I
question.
think the scalability will depend upon how fast the technology evolves. When people are saying they are targeting $1 per kg by 2030, if that is the pace probably maintained, I am quite hopeful that a lot of the gray hydrogen will be converted to the green hydrogen. And of course, the other technology challenges like banking of energy and all storage, those also need to be looked into by appropriate government policies. So all these technologies have to evolve together to make it as a complete integrated solution to the industry.
Excellent. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think, hello. I think as fellow panelists talked, and I also mentioned earlier, it's going to be challenge for at least from transition from blue to green from a scalability point of view. That, of course, I think you mentioned about $1, but at least next 5 years, right? Can we at least target $2 per kg, right? That's something a challenge ahead of us. And at the same time, I think use case you mentioned repeatedly, right? I think we heard about refining industry, power and other things. But I think I would go beyond that and look at transportation as the next generation industry where hydrogen would be used. But at the same time, the safety aspect is most important, which I talked about. So definitely there is a lot of R&D type of investment required to come up with the safety aspects. How do we store it? How do we transport it? Those aspects also has to be looked at, not just manufacturing. Of course, manufacturing is the key thing we all talked about, but then taking to the transportation, storage, safety, and then bringing the cost down, which is affordable to the common people is again another aspect to look at it.
But Sunil, do you actually see transportation scaling up?
Yes.
Because, very clearly the focus is on essentially large, heavy transport, buses, etc. We don't really see FCV cars in the decade ahead. It's probably just EVs that we are stepping into.
Yes.
But you do expect to see heavy transport scaling up in terms of green hydrogen.
Yes, yeah. Like we all talk about EV now, right? But maybe a generation will come, people will talk about hydrogen cars, yeah? And I don't think it will be very far away, maybe a decade along. At the moment, yes, energy is the focus, power industry is the focus, steel is the focus, but then hydrogen cars would be the next generation.
Terrific. Alok Sharma, last word, yours.
I echo what my fellow panelists have said, that refineries will be the largest user for green hydrogen. Then what he said about the transportation, I think transportation sector can also become a major user. Like in Japan, the major focus is on the transport. They have set up about 170 stations. So the major focus there is on the hydrogen usage in the transportation. So that sector can also become a major user. And then the power sector, a lot of work is going on the turbine side for use of hydrogen in the power sector. So that can also become one of the bigger users for hydrogen. That's all from my side. I think one point he raised about the water usage. That's a very relevant point in the present context for our country also. And for this also, we are working on some of the projects on using this seawater directly for the electrolysis. So that technology, of course, will have to be matured for, I think, taking this forward, for the electrolyzers to be taken forward. Because 1 kg of hydrogen requires about 10 kg of water. So that itself is a big challenge.
Absolutely. So water does become a very critical issue depending on where you're going to be creating your green hydrogen. Terrific, really enjoyable session. Thank you all for your questions, and to the panelists. I think we have a very interesting point in this sector, the petrochemicals arena, where you're the largest consumer of hydrogen. There is zero green hydrogen there. There's an aggressive roadmap for green hydrogen from the government. The question is, how quickly will this sector adapt with mandates, with policy push, incentives, etc. And we know a lot of it will depend on the other set of associated policy pushes apart from the mandate, including electrolyzer manufacturing, the energy security related things, the carbon credits. There is that, the whole, $100 billion fund which is supposed to be there from developed nations, and the utilization of that has not yet started. So there's a lot of imponderables, but clearly a very exciting space to be here. So thank you all very much, and a great thanks to my fellow panelists and those joining us over Zoom. Thank you, Shantanu, Dr. Ravi, Karen, and Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you.